So let me ask you the question, even though this is your interview. So you've gotten excommunicated from churches, and
Yes.
a lot of Christians don't like what you believe and so on, and wish you'd stop it, shut down your
Mhm.
channel. And you, I presumably, looked to the Hebrew Bible
Mhm.
and said, wow, the Hebrew Bible is very clear about the absolute unity of God. And there are ambiguous, I have no doubt there are ambiguous passages in the Christian Bible. Um, so why are you Christian then? That means if there's such clarity in the Hebrew Bible of what the Messiah is supposed to do, and there's really very little discussion about the Messiah himself except teaching, rebuking, judging with not by the sight of his eyes. And the world doesn't seem to have. I hope you don't mind me asking you this, because I always am mesmerized by Unitarians who I admire so much because they show such willingness to be ostracized, but because so why not apply that rigorous methodology and go, the Christologies that we find in the Christian Bible just don't are are very different than what we find Tanakh about the Messianic age.
So, I was not expecting that question, but I'm supposed to always be prepared to answer that question, as Peter says. Um, I think that probably the main reason that I'm a Christian is because I trust the testimony of the New Testament works about what Jesus said and did and what happened. And his miracles, his death, his resurrection, his appearance to the apostles after he died, I find to be credible and believable. And I don't think that what Jesus is described as being or doing is incompatible with the Hebrew scriptures statements about the Messiah. I think a lot of the disagreement between Jews who would not accept Jesus as the Messiah and Christians who do really can be at least somewhat diffused by the statement that, well, Jesus hasn't accomplished most of those things yet. And in a certain sense, from a way that a Jew might view things, Jesus is not the Messiah in the full sense yet. And that is a waiting of his second coming. But I don't think that there was anything incompatible about Jesus, what he said, what he did, what the New Testament says about him with the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. So I see that you're like, wait a minute, this guy gets a lot. He's not making a lot of the
Right. That means
mistakes.
it's right. That means you're I mean, and see, but what you're so see, I'm not the Trinitarians.
Sure,
I
sure.
get but you're like willing to question 95% of the Christian world.
Yeah.
And Tanakh is very, very clear about what Mashiach will do in the Messianic age and the transformation of the world, the restoration of the Jews to the land, and nothing about him dying for anybody's sins. And in the Christian Bible, he's very much dying as a ransom, especially in Paul and Matthew
Hmm.
and Mark, not so much in Luke. I mean, there's nothing remotely resembling this. And when you say that I trust the Christian Bible, but you're kind of begging the question, like, why? And why is that where you put the full stop? And there have been later claims of progressive revelation. I mean,
Hmm.
it means why do you believe if you say it just resonates with you, then I get it.
At some level, I think that faith will ultimately butt up against you can't really give a full explanation, right? I could ask you the same question of the Hebrew scriptures, and I think at some level you'll sort of ground out in a almost hard to articulate axiomatic level of trust.
Well, I don't think so. I think that the Hebrew Bible is basically my family album.
Hmm.
And this is the experience of my nation who endured the vicissitudes of Egypt and slavery. It's my people, it's my family. It's a
Sure.
family history. So we don't have to take anyone's word for it. Now, I could find out more about 9/11, although I remember the day vividly. I had a flight that day, but it's part of my family history. It's entrusted to my
But
people to
why do you
convey.
trust your family, right? That you're sort of jumping the axiomatic trust to I trust my family and my people and my history, which I'm not criticizing that. I
Right.
respect that, but I'm just sort of pointing out that you're kind of grounding out in some unquestionable level of trust. And
No, because there isn't. So let me explain that, and that's a very, very important it's a very good question because it's unlike any other religion in the world. The claim is strikingly unique, and that is it's a national revelation. That means the entire nation of Israel heard the voice of God. There's no parallel to that, and it can't be invented later, and the Torah says in Deuteronomy chapter 4, it never will happen. No other What other nation has heard the voice of God, seen what you've seen, and lived? Ata Reis Ladas, verse 32, that you should know that I think back of all time it's gone past. You have been shown this that you may know. So the that's why the Jews are called the witnesses of God, because we really the entire nation was there. Of course, I don't means I believe three angels appeared to Abraham as an article of faith. It's informed faith because I believe in the Torah, but as it is faith. But the Jewish experience is unique for multiple reasons. That's totally different than anything else. We're not trusting anyone. It actually happened to my family. And the text says if you have questions about what occurred to you in years past, ask your dad, Shalavicha ve'yagedcha zikenecha v'yemulach, Deuteronomy 32. The text is instructing you to go back to your dad. Moreover, it's interesting, you're a Unitarian. The text says that if a prophet arises and tells you about a God that your fathers didn't know, so you have to put that person to death. He's speaking presumptuously in the name of the Lord. So it is a national revelation. That's the claim. And that can't be invented because I'm including the audience in on it. I can persuade you that I flew to Jerusalem yesterday or the day before by helicopter, and you might believe me. But I couldn't say that you did that too. So the text is always saying to the reader, remember, remember, remember. And that's why Isaiah 43, verse 10 could say, Atem Edai no Mashem, you are my witnesses. Moreover, Isaiah doesn't add any new commandments, as Gavin said. He said there's progressive revelation. And I was dumbfounded when he said that because there are no new commandments in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. They would have been put to death if they articulated one new commandment. So no, Judaism stands alone as the nation experienced this, and then
Mhm. Well,
and this stands alone.
in no way do I want to argue against what you just said. In fact, I would, strongly affirm that. And I think that we Gentile believers need to be grateful to the Jewish family story as you're describing it and the national revelation of God to the Jewish people through history. I would completely agree with that. And in many ways, we are trusting in and benefiting from a family story that's not our own family story. And so I think that's perfectly rational and admirable and credible for you to be believing in that. And like I said, I'm sort of piggybacking on that credibility and rationality myself. But I could also say, my family's been Christian for a pretty long time. A decent amount of that was Trinitarian history, of course. But I have a funny way of feeling like, most Christians throughout time don't really actually believe in the Trinity. Like even most living Christians, they maybe get taught it, kind of give consent to it, but don't understand it. But the way that it makes sense in their own minds is actually not the doctrine of the Trinity. But, who are my first ancestors to be Christian? I don't know. I'm pretty Irish. St. Patrick got there pretty early in, say, the 4th century to Ireland. And so, that might be about the beginning of my family story connected to Christianity. But I could talk about how God's been faithful to my family and how our faith in God in connection with the Jewish story and the Christian story has been benefited, kept safe, protected, aided by God. and that I feel connected to that too. And that seems very similar to the sort of authority claim that you're making. And I think that is a big part of why I'm Christian. I mean, the short answer, why are you Christian? Well, I grew up Christian, and most people tend to believe what they get taught as a kid. And at some level, that's just as true of me as it is of you and many other people. But
Which denomination were you raised in?
I was raised a Unitarian.
Oh,
It's a complicated story. I was raised in a small biblical Unitarian church that had broken off from, other churches slightly before I was born. And so it was a relatively independent, kind of close-knit congregation. But I also had experiences with and exposure to other churches, especially evangelical churches. And so I would often, especially as an adult, when I was in other places besides the suburbs of Chicago where I grew up, go to Trinitarian evangelical churches, and those are the ones that will tend to kick me out at some point.
mm,
And so I have sort of a hybrid identity or upbringing between a biblical Unitarian church and a evangelical upbringing. Ironically, I grew up very close to Gavin Ortland, and I think that I could even imagine us having gone to some of the same youth groups or things like that. I'm not positive, but I
right.
suspect that that might be true. Uh, and so that is my story. But my mom grew up Catholic, right? They had been Catholic since St. Patrick came to Ireland. And my dad grew up a Congregationalist Christian, but then converted to biblical Unitarianism in college. And that's sort of my family legacy.
Mm,
But and I would also say a big part of why I'm Christian is because I do feel like I know Jesus, as cheesy or weird as that might sound. I do feel like I have a personal relationship with him, and that has been a guiding force in my life for the better. And that how could I abandon someone who hasn't abandoned me and has done so much for me? And that isn't just in an abstract sense, it's also in a very sort of personal sense. So I think all of those things are, I could give more rational arguments, but I suspect most of the core reasons why I'm Christian are very similar to the reasons why you defended your Judaism with, is that it's part of your family history and story, and that it seems credible to you for those sorts of reasons.
right. Right. But the Christian cannot say and wouldn't say that my great grandmother was there and saw Jesus raise Jairus' daughter from the dead, or make feed thousands of people with a very small amount of fish or bread. I mean, the Jew traces himself back to the event itself.
Mhm.
And it's really everyone is relying on the Jew. And in the Christian Bible, it is conveyed, even by Paul, that the oracles do come from the Jewish people. And the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, and therefore whatever they tell you, follow. And Matthew 23 is not a chapter that is favorable towards the Jews. It follows with an excoriating attack on the
Yeah,
Jews or the Pharisees, whatever it is. So
sure.
it's not. So I'm sort of taking hostile witnesses, but see, the Jew is unique, like uh, in that we trace ourselves back to the events themselves, not to something 1,000 years ago. It just seems to me, I've in all my years of broadcast, I've never asked the viewer. I want you to know this. It's because I admire you so much. I did something with you that I've never done on any show with a Christian who was interviewing me, and that is I'm so like I was raised as an Orthodox Jew. I've never been a Christian for a moment. But you have such a sensitivity to the truth. And in your view, the truth has to override your own personal experience, because you
Yeah,
have to know that there are many Catholics who are transformed in their worship and veneration of Mary, and whose lives have benefited greatly from
sure,
their
sure.
deep connection to the saints and so on, right?
Mhm.
You see, but you would say it, you do it alone, but it's just not rooted in Scripture. So whatever personal experience you have, or however it's helped your family to be a member of the Roman Catholic Church, it's not relevant, because Roman Catholicism is just not biblical. And it is. So I just say it to you. It's for my I'm actually puzzled by people like you, truthfully, because you have such integrity to Scripture that you're willing to be, vilified by the Trinitarian world because you're overriding whatever they're experiencing in the Trinity with what the text says. So I'm asking, that's why my thought was like, you're willing to do that so much, and you don't take into account the experience that Orthodox Christians have with the holy relics and so on, and Mary and all that, and that doesn't just means nothing to you about what happened in Portugal in the 20th century to thousands of people. Like none of that makes you even blink. So that's what like, why not just take it to the next level? But I really congratulate you for your integrity of being able to express that, but understand that my asking you that question comes from a deep place of admiration for you.
Well, I appreciate that. I wasn't entirely expecting to be asked that, but I am not offended or hurt in the least. And I don't know. I feel like at some level, what you're saying, I mean, you're arguing that there were national revelations to the Jewish people, say at Sinai and other times.
Right.
And how do you deal with the, Mary appearing to a bunch of people in Portugal question?
I think
That's
it's
sort of a,
nonsense. I
well,
I think it's nonsense, and
but how do you say that that's nonsense without undercutting your own people's, revelation and experience?
because the Torah also says very clearly that if anybody will come, Deuteronomy 13, and show you, I look. First of all, we both have examined the claim, and there were many people there, and there was basically some, the sun started flickering. I mean, this is not like, you know,
Mhm, mhm.
this is not very persuasive stuff. It's not quite Joseph Smith, who had quite the reputation, but
Sure.
the Torah says in Deuteronomy 13 that if a prophet or dreamer of dreams comes and shows you signs and wonders, and then he says, follow other gods your fathers didn't know, don't keep the Torah, do not follow the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams. I didn't say, and them say, Lord, I'm only testing you to see if you love me. So I happen to be quite sardonic
Mhm.
personally. That means I think there are people who are delusional or want to believe it so badly they really hear stuff. And much of it is just I know people who were in the Pentecostal church who felt so much pressure they started speaking in tongues, and in retrospect they realized what was going on. So I my view is that this is either people are self deluded or whatever, or it's chicanery or a mix of everything. But the Torah is not as sardonic, and the Torah says, no, take it seriously. Pharaoh's magicians were able to duplicate the miracles that Moses was. And the Torah says, don't add to it, don't take away. And if you see miracles, but the messenger is saying something that is not consistent with the Torah, then uh, don't listen to him and put him to death. And that goes to the other part of the Jewish experience, and that is the Torah is making predictions about the Jews, about our experience throughout history. We would be hated by the nations, yet they would admire our Torah. And the Torah says that one day you will come back. I will bring you back to this land, Deuteronomy 31, and the end of the book of Amos and Jeremiah. So, one of the things that made Einstein unique was that he made predictions in the early 20th century. Some of them, at the moment he expressed his ideas, could not be borne out. It would take years for scientists to use telescopes and wait for a solar eclipse. And the gold standard in Judaism is that the predictions actually come true. So here, the children of Israel, here, God has preserved us. He's kept his promise to the children of Israel that have been faithful to him. That's also a very unique element of the Jewish experience.
Well, I mean, and I wouldn't want to take away an inch of that. I agree with you that some collective spiritual experiences seem to be more persuasive, credible, impactful, um, veritable, etc., than others. And we can weigh Marian apparitions in Portugal versus the evidence of Sinai and those sorts of things. And I think that I would be right next to you with you on most of those investigations. Um, And I just find the credibility of those who saw Jesus and followed him and bear witness to what happened to him both when he died and afterwards to be credible of that same kind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose
Right.
I don't it's like at some level, we are grounding out in so I think that the subjective and the objective do need to kind of fit together. That there is, sort of we're testing the objectiveness of it. We're thinking about evidence and credibility and testimony and those sorts of things. But I do think it matches up with the interior experience, and that those things need to be complementary, and that it is, not entirely correct to only weigh one against the other.
Right. Yeah, but the Torah says, "Don't add to it nor take away from it." It means that
Hmm.
it don't change this thing. This has to be always the case that Jewish people always have to keep the
Yeah,
Torah, the prophecies of what the Messiah is supposed to do. Very clear. But anyways, I appreciate the opportunity to join you and to share this with you. Did you
sure.
have
Yeah.
any other questions you wanted to?
I don't think so. I think that this is probably a relatively good ending spot. I'll pass the mic over to you. I am still the host, and say, is there any last things that you wanted to share? Any last thoughts that
No,
you had?
I just appreciate my time with you, and I really admire you for being able to be raised as a Christian, to stand up for your Unitarian beliefs. I think that's really remarkable,
Hmm.
and I'm very grateful for the time that we had together. And please do stay in touch. I look forward to joining you again. So thank
Yeah,
you. Hello.
sure. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you answering my questions, and I also appreciate you asking me and poking me a little bit. I like it when a guest does that. I mean, I feel like good faith poking is the sort of the opportunity for constructive growth that we all really need. And if I'm wrong, I'm the first person who wants to know about it.
Mm,
So, uh, Rabbi Singer, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming
always.
on Transfigured, and maybe we'll bump into each other again sometime in the future.
I look forward to it. Thank you. Shalom.